Welcome to my podcast, Ganja Law 101. To understand Ganja Law, you have to understand drug law. The only reason I call it Ganja Law is because marijuana is the thing that doesn't fit very well. So the drug law basically starts in 1961 with international treaties. Federal drug law was written around that time to be consistent with the international treaties, and state drug laws were created on a model template that the federal government helped create. So the one thing that the federal and state and international drug laws have is schedules, and something that this podcast is going to focus on called an exemption. So what you have is schedules with varying degrees of control. So the idea of these modern drug laws was that we weren't going to have prohibition. We were going to have authorized use and abuse, unauthorized use, illegitimate use. So it wasn't going to be prohibition. It was going to be regulation. So that is why they all have schedules, and the schedules all have mechanisms where they can be adjusted through administrative procedures. And the exemption is also an administrative thing, but that's the focus of this whole podcast, is why we don't understand exemption as well as we do scheduling. So cannabis was rescheduled at the international level in December of 2020, just to show you that cannabis, that's why I call it Ganja Law instead of drug law, because cannabis is the lens by which you can see how this stuff works. And certainly it was rescheduled at the international level in 2020. The international schedules would be 1, 2, 3, and 4, but they added 4 as an afterthought. So 4 is like more severe than Schedule 1. In federal and state law, 1 is the most severe, but under international law, 4 is the most severe. That's kind of hard to grasp unless you are familiar with it. But what the UN did in 2020 was remove cannabis from Schedule 4. So that would be kind of similar to if we removed it from Schedule 1. And the purpose of that was to recognize that it actually did have some legitimate use. Prior to that, it was classified as having no legitimate use. So that obviously means a whole lot, and that's something to consider. But all that does is explain why I'm calling this Ganja Law instead of drug law. It's really drug law. And then Iowa is the first state to develop this exemption argument. So it's basically a podcast about Iowa because Iowa is the only state that is looking at something other than scheduling to resolve the current situation. So what Iowa did in 2014 was created an exception for cannabis for medical use. It had to be brought in from an out-of-state source. And then in 2017, we set up a program. So what I'm going to do is open up a web browser and go to the UN. Let's see if I can, I probably ought to use a search engine for this. So Single Convention, that's the treaty, 1961. You can see it right here, Single Convention, 1961. You go there, well, don't go there. Go to the UN, there it is. And don't go to the PDF file, go to the documents. And the reason I'm saying that is there's more to it than, the schedules are not in the text. Well, yeah, they are full text and schedules. So there we go. Oh, that's really cool. Unbelievable. Well, that's the end of this podcast. Why would it do that? That's stupid. That is odd. Well, all right. I am back, and I was able to find what I was looking for with Google, with trying some different searches. I just happen to know they call this list of schedules the yellow list, and there's a green list for the Psychotropic Convention, but I'll get into that. That's probably not relevant to this at all. It's a yellow list. So back to Google, or back to the web browser. So here's this page on the UN's website that has the three major international drug control treaties, but the only one I'm going to talk about is this first one. The other ones have similar language in them, so there's nothing different about them that wouldn't be true of all three of them, so I don't need to focus on those. So then there's this treaty page here for the single convention. It shows you all the signatories and when they signed on and if they had reservations. See, go down to the United States here. United States let's see, so yeah, I don't know. Anyway, the United States had a reservation, but let's see, United States of America. What do they say? Territorial. I don't know if I could find what I'm looking for here, but anyway, the United States had a reservation, an interesting one for peyote, religious use of peyote. And that is interesting. Here's a single convention on the International Narcotics Control Board page, and that's probably good because they just issued a press release a couple days ago saying the United States is out of compliance with the single convention. So we'll talk about that later. So here's the convention in English. You can download a copy of it. And then that's the green list, wrong list. This is psychotropic. This is the yellow list. So this is where you can get the list of scheduled substances, and you can get that in English. I'll come back to this later, but anyway, I should bookmark all these pages. Holy cow. Anyway, so that's that. So what you have to know is they have schedules, and that there's a process for amending those, and that the United States was a party to amending the treaty for marijuana back in December of 2020, taking it out of the most restrictive schedule in the single convention Schedule 4 because it has known legitimate use. Now, the United States hasn't followed, and the state have not followed. But what the states are doing is creating exceptions, and that's why I originally talked about schedules and exceptions, because what Iowa did was, rather than amending the schedules, they just created an exception. And in the Iowa Controlled Substances Act, it says if it's being used in compliance with this program that we've created, then it's not considered a violation of the scheduling. And the peyote exemption that I mentioned is like that. It's exempt under state and federal and international law, which I was going to show you there. We can come back to this in more depth, but that's how peyote is able to be used, and it's an exception. So let me pause here for a minute